and I know that's the current work he's also busy with, because in some ways he also marks the continuity of I think a generation of South African intellectuals, one might say particularly Black South African intellectuals, who in many ways had a very vibrant history in the 19th century, early 20th century, who were inside of the universities, and perhaps formally somebody like Archie Mafeje marks a kind of break in that way of somebody who was here and then had to leave. But if you take, of course, also A.C. Jordan, the chair again that Lungisile held while here, these are figures, Jordan, Mafeje, in many ways symbolic of a kind of generation of Black intellectual life that had been part of institutions, that had been through particular early missionary education, but then into universities, places like Fort Hare, so that you had a Black intellectual tradition inside of the university. But I think that the shift in many ways in the 1940s, and the shift to apartheid formally, and the shift to that is marked in many ways by the sort of naming of Black South Africans as natives to be Bantu, and the rise of Bantu education, and the institutions associated with Bantu education, and the extension of Universities Act of 1959, that marked in many a divergence between the institutions that Black South Africans would be educated in, and that those defined by their racial identities could be educated in. But also, of course, who would do the educating, I think, was very important. And no longer in those institutions was it going to be allowed that particular kinds of Black intellectuals could actually be the people who taught in those universities. And it became very difficult, and many people, as we know, went into exile. But others found intellectual life outside of the university, and that's a really important, I think, part of the legacy both of Lungisile in terms of his own, what he embodies, but also, I think, the work that he's been doing and the kind of intellectual traditions that he draws our attention to through that work, which was the spaces people had to create in order to keep an intellectual life alive, so that the university was not the only place. And I think that has given us a healthy skepticism towards the university, in the sense that it is not the only place where ideas are produced or people have discussed ideas. So, for example, we know the place of the reading group is a very important part of a tradition of intellectual life for many people, because the reading groups, were really the places where both a kind of pedagogical practice was developed, a different kind of education space, in a way, a reading practice, which I think many people have, or some people have begun to reflect on. And I think Fred mentions it in his piece in the edition. This emphasis on reading vigorously, sitting together with a text and discussing it. And I think that happening outside of the formal university space was so important. Of course, it also meant certain kinds of texts were read, certain kinds of figures were considered, certain kinds of traditions of thought were debated. And often these, of course, happened subversively. They were banned texts, they were subversive literatures. So it was a pedagogy and an intellectual community that was created in the shadows, that had to be underground. And again, embodies that. So I think it's really important and wonderful that the journal has marked that we had this opportunity to hear the colleagues who contributed to or some of them who have contributed to this, to reflect on these themes, but more that have looking to respond to those reflections, and to have an opportunity to think about this relationship between, these traditions of intellectual life inside the university, outside the university, the bridges between them, the frictions between them, and how people had to struggle to come back into the university spaces to bring certain kinds of figures, texts, debates back into the university in many ways after the 1990s, and something that we still, of course, struggle and continue to do as we debate curriculum, what it means to teach Africa, how we think about the continent, and our place in the world. So welcome and thank you. And I'll hand over to Tonga to take us in the first panel. Also, if you want to reflect on the journal, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Can we just wait for Peter Lawrence is able to speak? Peter, can you hear us? Is Peter online?
He was.
Yeah,
They were in fact earlier.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Because we're supposed to do the introduction together with Peter. So, okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, of course, everyone for coming. And this event started as an idea that was linked to the celebration of the centenary for the Center for African Studies at UCT. Lungisile, of course, retired towards the end of 2019 officially, and we were planning that we couldn't hold any event to celebrate his retirement. We thought maybe that no, he's still too young to be celebrated as a retirement. So we postponed that to 2020, and then 2020, COVID happened, and that we're not actually coming to campus. But we kept the idea that we can't let Lungisile just leave without making noise about his work and his scholarship. So we needed to say to him, you know, thank you for service. I don't think that UCT said that as an institution, but we as a center, because worked with him closely, we felt the need to be able to do that. So we had a plan that we are going to do the retirement farewell event together with the centenary for African Studies at UCT, which would have been 2021. As some of you would know, and Lungisile has been profiling this history, that the first African Studies at that time was called Bantu Studies, was established at the First University in 1921. So 2021 would have been the centenary for that, and we thought that that is the best way to say to Lungisile that we appreciate what you've done. And of course, for me, we're thinking about what format should this take. And knowing Lungisile, I was saying to myself or to colleagues that were organizing this, that the best way to say farewell to Lungisile is to not just to sit and have wine, but to sit around an idea, an intellectual idea, or conversation, because he emphasizes that all the time, that we have to have an intellectual project. We have to have an intellectual idea. And so I was convincing my colleagues who were planning this and say, instead of us just calling everybody and have wine and eat and go, that won't do, you know, good service to his mission. So let's have a conversation about his work. Let's engage his work. Yeah, let's engage in his work and see how we interact with that. And so in 2021, we thought that the best way is to organize a workshop where we invite people who worked closely with Lungisile from way back, the political trenches, in academia, because he struggles those too, as you'll see from the title of that special issue. It's about engaged scholarship and its role in the transformation of the continent. and Lungisile straddles those two. So we went back to look at who has been close to Lungisile. And we came up with quite a long list of names that would be not just South Africa, but from the rest of the continent, but also in Europe. And the response from the people we contacted when we put across the idea, the response was very positive. I was actually surprised that even under COVID, people were saying, look, we would be able to contribute to this. So we came up with about 25 people closely working with Lungisile. Some of them is supervisor, PhD supervisor. Some of them he's super VC. Finding on my right here, and we put them together, or we put a program together, and the theme for that was, engaged scholarship and engaged scholarship on the continent. We had a total of about 23 papers presented at the first workshop, and the way we organized this was that we wanted, first of all, for people to write papers and reflecting on Lungisile scholarship, how they engage with it. And we said we shouldn't just be saying what Lungisile has done, but engage with him academically, even where you say, okay, Lungisile said LCD and I don't agree, and so that it becomes an engagement. And from what I know of him, he would be more pleased with that than simply listing the work that was done. So the 23 papers presented at the first workshop, and what was fascinating for me was Lungisile's family, the older brother and the sister. It gave a very moving speech at the end. Of course, it was not a paper, but a reflection on his life. And one of the things the brother said was that to you people, this is Professor Ntsebeza, but to me, this is my little brother that I've known all the time. But we are very grateful that you've managed to do this. And then Ntsebeza also made a comment that caught my attention. He was surprised that we do, well, not surprised in the bad sense, but surprised in a good way, that we are doing a commemoration of his work, celebration of his work, sorry, before somebody dies. He says, no, I've always thought they do this for white people.
What class did they, what class
For
did
black
they
scholars. So which was profound, that we needed to celebrate the work of black scholarship, as Graham was indicating, that it's not just white scholarship that should be celebrated. So that was very profound for us, that we could do this and honor his work before he passes on, because we don't have to wait for someone to have gone and then we say, oh, it was nice, we wanted to say this when he was still with us. And so at the first conference we had those papers that reflected on Lungisile's life, including some colleagues from the Netherlands who came and have been working with Lungisile for a long time, and were central in his award of the honorary doctorate at liife. Of course, I mean, people presented, but we had to turn these presentations into papers. And the initial idea, we had two ideas. One was to do a book, an edited book, and the other one was to do a special issue of a journal. And when we looked around, we were thinking which journal should we approach for a special issue that would give us space to carry this. And what came to mind was the Review of African Political Economy, partly because the journal itself focuses on highlighting the contribution of scholarship on the continent to the transformation of the continent, including economic and political transformation. And so we then approached the editorial working group at DROP by Peter Lawrence and asked them if they would give us space for a special issue. And they said to us, yes, we will definitely do that. And the best way is you send us a concept note of what you want to do and what the themes are. And so we did that and we sent it to them. And happily they accepted, and they said to me that DROP has a very strict review or a very tight review process. So even if it's a special issue, it has to be reviewed by at least 2 peer reviewers, and then the authors should be able to incorporate those. So we went through that process, and at the end we ended up with 12 papers that are appear in the journal. We also thought about who can give an important forward to Lungisile's work, looking around the continent, and then we decided that we are going to invite Issa Shilti to do a forward, and you will see in there. Issa was not part of the workshop, but we thought that it would give an excellent input to Lungisile's work and reflected on the issue of land. So the papers that you see in the special issue reflect on Lungisile's work from the land issue to governance and democratization in the countryside, but also on his work with social movements or grassroots people, and has been instrumental in that. We'll hear some of that from family and friends. I think with those, maybe I should hand over to Peter to speak about the significance of doing a special issue on the 50th anniversary of the review of African political. Peter, if you are listening, you can hear us. The floor is yours now.
I hope you can hear me. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
And Peter.
Hello?
You can speak.
No, it's for him to speak.
Yes.
Okay. Can you speak?
He's not speaking.
Ask him maybe to unmute.
Now, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Oh, Jesus. What is that?
That mute, but it doesn't hear.
Hello?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah,
Peter, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Oh, good. Okay. Well, let's go.
You have to know.
Okay.
This is the last. The loud.
You need me to be louder.
Yes.
I'm not I can do anything about that. Microphone is on. Yeah, microphone is on. Okay, this is yes, this is a great honor for me to do this and to speak on behalf of the Review of African Political Economy, of which I am a founding editor. Are you hearing me?
Yes, we can hear.
Okay. So the significance of doing a special issue for Lungisile in this this is the 50th anniversary year of the publication of this journal, and the journal was founded specifically to offer a very different perspective on Africa and African transformation, and it was established by a group of people, some of whom had just come out of Tanzania and had been very much influenced by the that version of African socialism that was Julius Nyerere's, and so there was that, and the prospects for a radical transformation that for a moment, for some and then the other group was a group of exiled South Africans, including people like Ruth First. And so the journal was established in a period of liberation struggle especially in Southern Africa. Now I'm getting my voice.
Okay.
Yeah. And so it was established as a journal of solidarity with the liberation struggles, not only the liberation struggles for independence, but the struggles of countries that were trying to do things differently and moving in a socialist direction. And so you can access the whole history of the journal, you can access on our website, rope.net, through our new publishing platform, Science Open, and all the details of that will be in the issues of the journal that I'm sure you're all going to buy. But the important thing is that we had two objectives. One was to provide a very different view of what was happening on the African continent, and two, to try to engage more authors from Africa, and three, what we wanted to do was eventually to bring the journal to be based in somewhere in Africa. So that was the objective. And 50 years later, we still have that objective, and we're getting closer to it. The specialist commemorating the life and work of Lungisile Ntsebeza is very important for us because first of all, it's an issue which is largely written by people from Africa and on the African continent, and secondly, it's very important for us because it focuses on engaged scholarship, on Lungisile as an engaged scholar, and on the importance of scholarship and the importance of being a scholar activist. And the activist elements of scholarship into the analysis of whatever is being researched and analysed. We're very pleased, particularly because of there are some links with the University of Cape Town and Centre of African Studies, and the story or the reference has been made to Archie Mafeje. Archie was one of our first overseas editors when he was at the Institute of Social Studies in The Hague, and was involved indeed in discussions of the establishing of the journal. So we like with the University of Cape, the Centre of African Studies, through Lungisile's own work on Archie, and so that's another reason why having these articles published in Rope is very, very important for us, and is a kind of milestone too. So that is established by scholar activists. That is involve increasingly scholar activists or engaged scholars from the African continent, an issue which is produced almost entirely on the well, in fact, entirely on the African continent. And that is very, very important, very significant for us, because we're moving slowly towards the idea of actually somewhere on the African continent and moving with that objective, and moving a lot faster than we have moved before. So that's again a very important part of that process. So what we think we've done, we tried to do from the beginning, and I'm actually one of the few founding editors still on the planet. What we've tried to do from the beginning is create a journal which has a special character, which is not a traditional academic journal, which is a journal which has a degree of commitment to the transformation of the African continent, which is very much favoring Marxist analysis, and which is concerned with power of the state, and so we consider ourselves to be somewhat different. Ideology. We don't necessarily have a line on every single issue, but we have an ideology. And so this year is also special because not only are we celebrating that 50 years, but we're also moving away from a corporate publisher back into the independent publishing that we did for the first 20 years. And we are now not only moving away from Taylor and Francis, the big corporate global conglomerate, we are also and going into independent publishing, but we are also going open access, what in the publishing trade they call diamond open access. So we're now
Peter, Peter, can
Yes.
you hear me? Yeah, we're
Yes.
having a problem with the audio. It's a little bit vague or low. The volume is low. So we were thinking that maybe you could just wrap up and then we can continue.
Okay.
Yes, sure. Thank you.
Okay, so what of course we want everybody to do is to help us fund this process of independence and self-publishing by subscribing, even though it's open access, and you can go on the web and you'll find on rope.net everything that we've published. We are encouraging people to subscribe to the journal nevertheless, and also to get their libraries to subscribe. So that's a kind of commercial, and I'm sorry you've not been able to hear me very well, but I hope the rest of the seminar goes well, and I shall be very interested to hear all the contributions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter, and apologies for the sound, the audio on that link. Colleagues, I am relieved to say everybody else who will be speaking will be in the room. So we are here. But I do want to apologize. Andrew Nash, who was supposed to speak next, is not joining us, but he has asked the partner to present some of his thoughts. So I'm going to pull out, and maybe you can introduce yourself, please. Thanks for coming.
Where do I come from?
When you feel comfortable, you can stand here.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to be here. Can you hear me at the back?
Yeah.
I'm here on behalf of yeah. As you heard, I'm here on behalf of Andrew Nash, the retired Associate Professor of Political Studies at UCT and a long time friend. Yes. My name is Coroni Fornell. I've never worked with Lungisile, but I have had the pleasure of doing a life history interview with him, but only up to the point before he became an active. So I know about the bioscopes on Saturday mornings, I know about all sorts of wonderful things, but we stopped deliberately before his academic career began, because that's been pretty well recorded, I think, in different forums and formats. What I'm going to do is just read 2 and a bit paragraphs from what Andrew wrote in a very personal tribute to Lungisile, which happens to be at the beginning of the book. And I'll just read the headings in between to give some sense of the flow of it. He's really sorry not to be here. The piece is called Clearing a Path to Academia, a tribute to Lungisile Ntsebeza. And the headings, the first one is Light Heart and Strong Commitment. Light Heart and Strong Commitment. And Andrew writes this as his first paragraph. Okay. Lungisile Ntsebeza's commitment to his chosen path of intellectual inquiry came at a turning point in his life while he was facing trial in Umtata, on charges under the Suppression of Communism Act in 1977. Many obstacles were put in the way of this commitment in the years that followed. Imprisonment, then banishment to his hometown of Kala, the murder of his cousin, Batandwa Ndondo, by an apartheid death squad, followed by its extensive covering up, including Lungisile's detention without trial and further banishment to a remote area, cutting him off from the outside world. Obstruction and hostility from the humanitarian agency meant to support victims of apartheid repression. Then a return to the conventional banishment of before, now driven by the anger of a dictatorial president and seemingly extended into the indefinite future. By the time Lungisile was able to become part of collective academic life, 10 years had passed since his initial commitment to this path, 10 years. I want to provide a short history of the winding road he traveled from 1977, when he decided to apply himself to the study of philosophical questions, to 1987, when he began his postgrad studies at the University of Cape Town. It's not only that Lungisile stuck to his decision. What stands out for me is the light heart and strong commitment with which he confronted the obstacles in his way. Imprisonment and persecution may have changed him, but not in the way that his persecutors would have hoped. Even when their lives and freedom were in imminent danger, Lungisile and his brother Dumisa were still able to laugh out loud with the whole of their generous being. And now I'm just going to read the headings and then I can cover the sentences at the end. First heading here, and there's a story behind each one. You'll have to read it. Accountant / revolutionary / philosopher. Accountant, there's a story there, / revolutionary / philosopher. The next section is the view from Stellenbosch, which might surprise you. The third, sad to say, is the murder of Patandwa Ndondo, Lungisile's cousin brother. Next, covering up Patandwa's murder. Next, waiting for Matanzima again. And the final section, eventually, academic life resumed. And I'm just going to read a couple of sentences from that from some time back. You know, dot, 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 story, story, story. After 10 years, he was back on the path he had chosen a decade before, although the landscape had changed in those years. I will leave it to others to speak of his extraordinary career since then and the depth and scope of his achievements. And Andrew writes, when I think back to the years I've described, I'm struck by Lungisile's clarity of mind, often in circumstances in which such clarity is hard to muster. His wholehearted enjoyment of life and a distinctive kind of practical wisdom, perhaps with its roots in love. And he says, there is an image which comes back to me now, which seems to me to encapsulate these qualities and perhaps others as well. And I'm not going to tell you that story. I'm not going to give you that image. It's a story that includes Steve Bantubiko, and so it's worth reading, but I won't tell it to you now. And right at the end, Andrew says, referring to the discussion that I haven't told you about, it was a question about political perspectives and priorities, rather than a question about shoes. It is that frame of mind that causes me still to think of Lungisile as a philosopher, even if he may no longer always do so.
It's sort of a segment between Andrew and Fred for me is also, in a way, brings back a memory of UWC because Andrew was my philosophy lecturer. And they ran the Marxist theory seminar group, which Fred was one of the key people, and then have these huge lunchtime seminars. 300 people might come to debate, you know, because philosophy at that time was also about the revolution was imminent. And we had a course I did with Andrew and Hegel, and we spent the whole term talking about the practice of reading in one sentence. I think we spent the whole term on one paragraph on the dialectic of master and slave in the phenomenology of spirit, and doing everything on head. And we go to reading Andrew's piece as well, and to welcome Fred to share his reflections on me and in general. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Suren. Thanks very much for standing in. Can you all hear me at the moment? Thank you. So, yeah, we're here again, and very happy to be here, I must say. But I'd like to start by thanking Chitonga and Peter. I'm not sure if you can hear us. Can you hear us, Peter?
Yeah.
Well, for giving me the opportunity to talk at this important event, and also for the work on the special issue. Because your scrupulous attention to detail in line by line editing, that's become a big thing. As an editor myself, I'm especially appreciative of this concentrated effort. I know what it takes to do what you've done. And in addition to that dogged determination, which is very clear in Chitonga's case particularly, making sure that it gets done in the end, and abiding commitment to a bigger picture, I think those two issues, together with the line-by-line detailed close reading of each article, rest very comfortably with Lungisile, since these are characteristics that we all associate very closely with Lungisile. So thank you very much for honouring Lungisile in this uniquely appropriate manner, in both the product of the special issue, as well as what went into making it. I'd also like to thank you for assigning a title to my talk, Sustaining the Legacy of the Organic Revolutionary Intellectual, Lungisile Ntsebeza. I embrace the title with alacrity. Okay. But I'm not entirely sure that I'm competent to deliver on it. What the title has done, though, is to place me in an interrogative mode, starting with the question, how does one begin to sustain such a legacy under the current circumstances? So in addressing this question, I've divided this short talk into 3 sections. First, I begin with a brief introduction to memorializing legacy and commemorations with some 2 examples. We are, of course, very fortunate, as Chitonga mentioned earlier, to be doing this while Lungisile is still with us. So, in a sense, we can co-construct his legacy with his own input. After doing that, I proceed to provide what I kind of define as the barest outlines of Lungisile's contribution. And I conclude with some perfunctory reflections on honouring Lungisile and sustaining an emancipatory project. In each of these sections, I'm asking myself a whole range of questions. And I'm asking you as well, I suppose, and I hope that you'll provoke some discussion after it. I wouldn't like to repeat what I've written in the journal because that's done. And I think we should use this event instead, as Chitonga suggested, to reflect on the broader implications of the issues that Lungisile has helped us understand through his scholarship and his activism, through his research and his activism. Knowing Lungisile, I think I can say quite confidently that he would be the first to appreciate the deep problems with exalting an individual outside of a wider context. If you look at his consistent disdain for unelected traditional authorities and for the respect that they receive simply by virtue of their status, it tells you a great deal about his outlook in these matters. For me, it's extremely important that we acknowledge Lungisile's role as a springboard for considering where we are in our various struggles in scholarship and in society more broadly. This is consistent with Lungisile's approach to engage in the historiography, but also to open up a direct and critical reflection on how we might advance struggles at universities, as well as social struggles beyond the boundaries of our campuses. As a society, we are rotten at memorializing, and there are many examples of dilapidated and derelict monuments strewn across the country. But I'd like to mention just one of these, and also one major gap, I think, both from the Eastern Cape, which is, of course, Lungisile's refuge, his sanctum, the area of his greatest intellectual, material, and emotional investment. I can say unequivocally that the Eastern Cape is the part of the world that matters the most to Lungisile. We've all got places in the world that matter to us. Eastern Cape matters the most to Lungisile. To put it bluntly, he loves the Eastern Cape, and I have to say I share his love of our shared blessed bird. The one example of neglect that I'd like to mention is the Egazini Memorial in Makanda, depicting the Battle of Grahamstown, which now lies in a ruin, surrounded by loose concrete, rubble basically, rubbish, goats and donkeys. It was a vitally important battle in the colonial subjugation of indigenous people, and the memorial was meant to make us never forget our agency. But if you observe Egazini now, it does not play that role at all. It is a premature ruin, depicting our many failures on so many different fronts. The geography and architecture of Makanda also demonstrate very clearly how our commemorations of the past remain deeply racialized. With the 1820 Settlers National Monument standing tall on the other side of the valley as a reminder of enduring colonial might. So, if you've ever been to Makanda, there's a very clear valley. There's clearly an urgent need for us to more accurately reflect the historical atrocities of the colonial dispossession of land. To this day, the management of the 1820 Settlers National Monument rests with the Grahamstown Foundation. They've not changed their name, even though the city is no longer called Grahamstown. The website does not pay any attention to the degrees of colonial terror that were necessary to seize people's land. Instead, it presents a case of a benign interest in civilizing the natives. So on the western side of the valley, there is a functioning, living monument. For example, it's the place where Rhodes University has its graduation ceremonies. Lungisile himself walked across the stage there for his PhD. It's the center for the National Arts Festival, a place where our creativity and imaginations are allowed to flourish. It's a place filled with life. In contrast, on the eastern side of the valley, we have a useless, neglected, dead Egazini monument. Egazini refers to a place of blood, and I'm afraid that that blood has been spilled yet again through our own neglect. So there are two really big questions here. How do we transform the 1820 Settlers National Monument to reflect our histories more accurately? And at the same time, how do we transform Eastern Makanda into a place of dignity? There's one other example in this kind of area of commemoration that I'd also like to mention. For me, it's a huge gap in our collective memories. We don't have any monument whatsoever to the place where Steve Biko and P.C. Jones were arrested, also in Makanda. It won't be difficult to erect a plaque at that place. So a few months before his death, I spoke with P.C. about his arrest of Biko, to try to establish exactly where they were arrested. He had unfortunately lost the power of speech by the time I spoke with him, but he could communicate, and he managed to tell me that they had been taken from a place just outside Grahamstown, as it was then called, to the part of the police station that today is at Rhodes University. In fact, it's the politics department at Rhodes University. The politics department at Rhodes University today used to be the special branches officers of the police. Maybe an interesting reflection. Nobody runs it on it. I'm mentioning these examples for us about the enduring contradictions of a post-apartheid South Africa. This is the context within which we are honouring Lungisile, a society riven with deeply entrenched racialized inequalities. So our first question is, what are the issues that animated Lungisile and which he played such a central role? In other words, what is Lungisile's legacy? And here I'm splitting the legacy into his role at UCT, and I'm splitting that from his contribution beyond the walls of the university. In the piece that's published in the journal, I use the metaphor from A.C. Jordan, after whom the chair for African Studies is named, who justified his move from Fort Hare to the University of Cape Town in the 1950s by famously saying that he was moving to keep the door ajar for blacks to enter. Of course, this resonated with the Freedom Charter demand that Fort Hare probably predated, to think about it, it predated the Freedom Charter, in fact, fed into the Freedom Charter, that the doors of culture and learning shall be opened. If indeed Jordan is responsible for keeping that door ajar, Lungisile has walked through it and ensured that they've been thrown wide open, long before the recent the student struggles in South Africa. In August 2019, Lungisile hosted an all-day symposium entitled, "I'm going to open that door and keep it ajar, the political and scholarly legacy of A.C. Jordan," which speaks directly to the need for transformation and decolonization of higher education. I was very pleased that Suren mentioned A.C. Jordan's legacy, as well as, of course, Archie Mafeje's legacy, and now there's a generational aspect to it. We are looking at Lungisile's legacy as well. Lungisile has kept the doors of learning at UCT open in many ways, often in the face of official reluctance to embrace the changes that he was proposing. First, in developing curriculum, very vital part, introducing courses on land and agrarian questions in South Africa and further afield in the sociology department, as well as at the Center for African Studies. This was transformative in a context of an overwhelming urban bias. Second, over the years, he's arranged many seminars, symposia, conferences at UCT, principally around issues of activism and research. Third, he played a consistent role in ensuring transformative recruitment practices at the university. Fourth, and for me, one of the most important aspects of his legacy, he mentored, nurtured, and supervised many promising young scholars, like Nomalanga Kize, who isn't here, I'm afraid, but finally, Mustafa is here. In the African Humanities Association, which is my primary occupation at the moment, we're trying to develop intergenerational dialogue through a program we're calling Linkages, Link, open brackets, ages, to ensure that we have this notion that the elders can learn from the younger scholars, and the younger scholars can also learn from. But basically, we can learn from each other, and I think that it is taking off in an encouraging kind of way. And it's vital also that those legacies become part of an entire intellectual tradition. The only way to do that really is remember what has gone before you. So there's no doubt that he was not only central in establishing something called the African Studies Association of Africa, becoming the inaugural president of that association. But his presence at UCT was transformative in a whole variety of different ways. Something that was recognized when he received the prestigious Hamilton Naki Award in 2017. But he's opened up many other doors, not only those at UCT. His influence is far wider. In the piece that I did, I concentrated on 4 areas of his work, which are intertwined in very complex ways: the chieftaincy and traditional authorities, the legacy of Archie Mafeji, land and agrarian questions, and questions of struggle which pervade and infuse all of these areas. Each of these areas deals with the unfinished business of emancipation, revealing Lungisile's deep appreciation of the limits of constitutional change in addressing the fundamental questions of material inequality. Like many of us, he is working through the apparent paradox of political equality on the one hand, enshrined by a franchise, we're all equal before the law, so to speak, and the other side of the paradox, material inequality upheld by private property, and in Lungisile's work in particular, mainly property in land. So he's working through that. Since it does ask questions, I thought I'd include the section on chiefs and traditional authorities from the paper. So in 1999, about 25 years ago, Lungisile and I published an article in which we asked the following questions. If indeed the chieftaincy was robbed of the internal dynamics vital to the autonomy of chiefs, how is it that they've survived for so very long? If part of the reason for this longevity is the fact that some chiefs had become co-opted into the local arm of the colonial state, how does one explain the persistence of the apparent legitimacy? After all, if one grants chiefs some recognition, as our constitution does that not amount to an implicit endorsement of tribes and tribalism? How does this blend with the notion of a united nation? Is it possible to recognize chiefs outside of a tribal constituency? How did some chiefs shift from being the tools of oppression to active agents of liberation? Now, these questions, I think, still remain relevant today, 25 years later. And Lungisile has been at the forefront of deconstructing the chieftaincy to lay bare the enduring problems of unelected representatives in democracy. Ironically, the two parties who pretend to be on the left of our political spectrum, the EFF and MK, are very well disposed to traditional authorities, with little appreciation of the palpable contradictions in such a stance. There are 2 points that I'd like to make in conclusion, and which I hope to contribute in some way to sustaining Lungisile's legacy. Throughout his life, one of the common features of Lungisile is his love of books and reading. He pioneered a bookstore in Tswala in the heyday of apartheid under the watchful eye of the security police, and is now in the process of setting up a resource center in the town. There can be few more promising ways of sustaining a legacy than providing the necessary resources for a community to read. Connectedly, let's ask questions about how we might put our shoulders to the wheel in engendering an appreciation of one of the last remaining public goods in our society, our libraries. They are horribly underutilized across the country, making it hard to realize one of the most powerful African proverbs, that knowledge is something that does not diminish when it is shared. In fact, to the contrary, it grows and builds the more. I have to say here too, that Lungisile has contributed enormously to sharing and growing our knowledge. And in so doing, has contributed to the development of an informed citizenry, which we know is absolutely essential in sustaining democracy. Perhaps Lungisile should engage the Tswala Public Library about his plans to set up a resource center. There may be areas of fruitful collaboration, and perhaps there could be a revival of the reading groups that Suren spoke about earlier on, which played such a significant part in Lungisile's own political awakening. As much as we celebrate the inestimable contribution which Lungisile has made, he more than anybody knows that our work is not done, and we must confront our failures as the broad left, both nationally, continentally, and globally. Essentially, we become irrelevant, as that space has been captured by rogues, thieves, and criminals parading as revolutionaries. There was a time when intellectuals, and revolutionary intellectuals in particular, played a role, especially in the struggle against apartheid. And Lungisile, of course, is a very good example of that. But I think we can all safely say that we've not navigated the terrain of democratic South Africa with the same urgency and confidence as we did in the struggle against apartheid. And there are many reasons for this generalized segregation of research from social struggles. But I must say, and I'd like to conclude with this, that Lungisile stands out as an exception in this respect. His life's work is inextricably bound up in a commitment to understanding the linkages between social struggles and social research, both as part of an overarching emancipatory project. Finally, to conclude, the one aspect of Lungisile that has stood out for me through all of these years is his fierce independence of mind. Being outside the dominant charterist tradition has led to his marginalization from the workings of officialdom, but this has not deterred him in the least in his thoroughgoing struggles for social justice in his research and ongoing activism. Thank you very much.
Paper, but also the spirit of a kind of critical tradition and the kinds of questions around the Eastern Cape that you raised, so central. I also just wanted to note that, I mean, I think Fred mentioned the African Humanities Association, and to really mark that out, not that specifically the association, but the work of building an intellectual community on the continent that Lungisile has been involved with, that has been so important for many of us. And I think Fred himself has been also devoting a huge amount of energy to that work. So both, I think, they probably both of you for that contribution. Which also means that a new generation emerges out of the work that you do. And Anya, I'm going to invite you to share your thoughts with us as somebody who has come through that process. And get speak from if you're comfortable, wherever you're comfortable. Thank you.
First, I wish to apologize for my colleague, Nashia Andrews, with whom we put together the paper. But we feel honored to get this opportunity to reflect on Lungisile Ntsebeza's academic work, which has received international recognition. She identifies two types of scholars or intellectuals. Intellectuals who use ideas and knowledge not only to challenge dominant ideas, but to introduce alternatives. And on the other hand, it's intellectuals who use their expertise and knowledge to retain and perpetuate the status quo. Ntsebeza belongs to the former, and we regard him as a community engaged scholar. Morrison, according to Morrison, a community engaged scholar is one who co-creates knowledge that addresses community identified concerns and challenges. This definition fits Ntsebeza because he has used and still uses his expertise to work with communities in finding solutions to their challenges. To make our point about his work, our article focuses on three broad themes of his work: democratization, land and equity, as well as social movements. Centrally, we reflect on his commitment to working with marginalized communities and promoting the agents of marginalized sections of society. Meshia and I have a long political relationship with Ntsebeza, dating back to the early 1980s. Meshia first met Ntsebeza when he ran a bookshop that Fred referred to in Tsala, in the former Transkei. Meshia moved between the Western Cape and Tsala, transporting some political books from the bookshop. The late Naval Alexander linked Meshia to Ntsebeza. The two continued, that is, Meshia and Ntsebeza, continue to work closely in development work, including through the Trust for Community Outreach and Education, an NGO that has national footprint. Similarly, I have had a close social, political, and academic relationship with Ntsebeza since the late 1980s. We started working together as development activists in the Tsala University Students Association, another NGO in Tsala. I met him after our expulsion from high school for political activities in 1985. To appreciate Ntsebeza, one has to understand his family background, the political environment, and his training, political training. His middle-class parents with tremendous contribution to the education molded him and his siblings. He acknowledged this fact when he says, "I grew up as a reader. This was an influence of my parents and siblings." The magisterial district of Palanga, where he grew up, also influenced his outlook. Palanga was regarded as an educational center due to its missionary influence. Despite the association of missionaries with colonial conquest, missionaries contributed to the introduction of education and educational facilities in African societies. Palanga benefited from that because they read the Roman Catholic, the Dutch Reformed, and the Methodist churches who built schools in the area. The period Ntsebeza grew up in between the early 50s and mid 70s was a period of momentous development nationally and continentally. It was a period of anti-colonial struggles that toppled colonial rule in several African states. Nationally, we saw the intensification of the apartheid ideology, the introduction of the Bantu Authorities Act in 1951, and the implementation of the abroad betterment schemes through the national authorities. The introduction of Bantu education in 1953, and the closure of mission schools and their takeover by the apartheid government. On the opposite side, there was the defiance campaign by the African National Congress in 1952, the launch of the Freedom Charter in 1955, the formation of the PAC in 1959, followed by the Sharpeville massacre in 1960, and the arrest of black people's political leaders and banning of political organizations. In Palana, the period saw the emergence of organizing resistance through the Chisa movement against betterment schemes. Influenced by these developments, Ntsebeza became part of an emerging Marxist-Leninist political group called the People's United Front for the Liberation of South Africa in his early 20s. Although the incarceration from 1976 to 1981 of the group's key members, the members resolved to continue with their activism in Ghana when they came out of prison. 2 years later, that is after the release in 1981, they formed the Ghana University Students Association, ZANUSA, the NGO. Through it, they organized alternative educational programs, seminars, night school program, and winter schools. As a believer in the primacy of agents of the people, he became part of national efforts to mobilize the youth in the 1980s. One such initiative was a meeting in Grahamstown in 1984, that is Makanda now, which focused on youth leadership formation. He was also among ZANUSA members who decided to provide space for learning in ZANUSA to learners that were expelled in the mid-1980s in schools. He was also instrumental in some of these learners getting into Kenya College when he was part of the institutions, of the institution in the late 1980s. From the 1990s, he made tertiary institutions accessible to children, mostly from poor backgrounds in Malawi. After the University of Natal, at the University of Natal in the early 90s, he provided opportunities for youth to get into the institution through a program called Teach as Teach. He also facilitated my entry to the University of Natal in 1994 and worked with him academically up to my PhD level. Hendricks correctly refers to him as throwing the doors of learning wide open. Ntsebeza's academic development was strengthened by his Marxist training, and he approached his academic work through a Marxist lens. He was among a few scholars who used class analysis to highlight the failings of the Land Reform Program, which marginalized poor people from accessing land. Ntsebeza is also critical of the impact of the property laws, and I'm not going to say more, and Fred has commented on this. Moreover, his scholarship has a direct contribution to the growing cost for the democratization of governance in the country. He used his knowledge about traditional authorities to assist the residents of Ghana Reserve in successfully challenging legally imposed unelected headmen. The case inspired TCOE to launch the democratization campaign nationally. More importantly, the support he gave to ZANUSA and TCOE personnel and community leaders on land and governance has contributed to the emergence of articulate local leaders. in the rural space. In conclusion, Ntsebeza has skillfully combined theory and practice in his academic work. This comes from his political training. His academic knowledge and expertise are not for personal interest, but for societal support. He has enabled several young people from working class families to gain access to educational institutions. And as Fred puts it, he has thrown doors of learning wide open. Thank you.
Have a moment in the program for open discussion. But I think it was really also useful that you noted a certain kind of political tradition that I think it embodies, and yes, you describe a political history of the emergence of the ANC, the PAC, the Black Consciousness movement. There's of course also these other, what we might, I wouldn't say minor political traditions, but those that were not in the dominant. As we look back and we narrate the history of the anti-apartheid struggle, of course, we tend to focus on the major political formations in the nationalist movements, but we also focus on the major Marxist traditions, the Communist Party tradition of South Africa. But there was, of course, other political traditions that were quite formative, and that we might call the non-Communist Party tradition, non-Stalinist tradition. I'm hesitant to say Trotskyist tradition because that was it's not a singular tradition, as we know. It's part of the problem, but I think the kind of relationship between studying and reading and struggle and the debates about Marxism, in a way, or the kinds of Marxism that was central to organizing either the industrial working class, or what does it mean to think of that countryside, as we say, what was the kind of historical role of the peasantry. All of those were debates that I think were quite in line that you touched on. But colleagues, I open it up for maybe 15 or so 20 minutes. If any of you have any questions or reflections you'd like to share before you say the response. Yes, and perhaps introduce yourself.
Lynette Steenveld. I'm most interested in the last speaker's presentation, and what came across there for me, what was interesting to me, was the focus on education and educational movements and the role of educational movements for political education, which ended up as means of politicizing young people. So education wasn't linked to upward mobility. It was linked to social transformation. And I just struck again about how important that is, and how important it is to remember that we do have that tradition, and there are many traditions. And as you speak about the kind of Trotskyist, the many Trotskyist factions or movements, I'm kind of reminded of the South Peninsula Educational Fellowship, for example, as a educational kind of movement space for opening education. But again, it was politicizing young people. It was a space of politicization. And I think that's what perhaps we've lost. And I think perhaps that's what we need to go back to. So, for example, that a gated Mackenzie doesn't become an icon because his ignorance is frightening. Yeah. So that's just the one point, if I may. And if I may just make the other point that struck me was about Lungisile's work on chieftainship and chieftainship. And that link with the power of that institution, and as an institution that is non-democratic. And I can't remember if Fred or somebody then linked that to a sort of how is that sustained? And to me, that question of how it is sustained and how tribalism and re-ethnicization is sustained is really important. It's another one of those really important questions that we need to go back to today as one of the problems that we're facing in our current political lack of transformation.
Thank you. Thanks.
I just want to acknowledge. My name is Frank Matose. I'm part of the furniture in this university, but I owe that to Lungisile, who moved on to his research so that I could have space in the sociology department. But more importantly, not these structural issues, and it's a point that hasn't been raised. This mentoring within this institution. Now we are where we are as an institution called the University of Cape Town. Before, as some colleagues will attest, it was a very fraught space, not just for Black academics, but also for young academics new to this space. We were very privileged to be emboldened also to use, I'm a rural person, to feel embraced, you know, when the hand sort of cushions its cheeks. That's the role he has played here to younger scholars across the board. And I want to surface these kind of issues. First, with the new liberalization of the production sort of process of throughput, you know, students come in and go within certain timelines. Literally, Lungisile raised a middle finger to that and emboldened us. No, literally. And emboldened, it doesn't, you know, how Lungisile can be very vociferous and passionate about a particular way of doing things. And emboldened us to do. Now it's in history. But if you are new to a space like this, you would like to stay within those confines of a student must finish by 3 years of PhD. Which PhD finishes? 3 years. Who does that? But even in terms of scholarship, can you finish your research project now when you are more senior? Can you finish a research project in 3 years? Who does that? But, you know, thanks to people like Lungisile who have emboldened to say, it doesn't matter, let each scholarship project have its own lifespan. And also, secondly, in terms of who constitutes a scholar and an academic, is it always those who have certain parameters, who meet certain criteria? Yeah. Lungisile emboldened us to sort of say, to identify potential beyond this, you know, what you call it, these marks and, you know, whatever percentage and so on. But to have a conversation to say, to identify talent, so to speak, and some of the products are sitting there today and outside, thanks to that sort of contribution, even for, yeah. Maybe I would have been kicked out already by not meeting criteria had I not felt cushioned by that. A sort of boldness that you also note only in rural spaces, but in this institution, that wasn't transformed at the time we joined. It's important to have people who are bold like that to cushion younger scholars, and I learned a lot personally. Thank you, comrade.
This engaged scholar, and one I want to make just three points. One is all I got to know of him was actually when I was doing my honors. I was struggling to conceptualize an honors project with the supervisor, and she asked me, Professor Pamela Mseko, who is also worked very closely as a research partner, something like that, who asked me, what are your passions? What are you passionate about? I said, I think I'm a big doer. I like this idea of working with communities and still doing, the work of the university. And then she said, there's one person that I think you would like, and I would like to connect to you. And that is because I want to see what's the And that's when I got to the student. He was involved in the honors project. He was ideas. That's when I started to read about my passions. So he was quite instrumental in this idea of mentoring, young scholars. And we were not met then, except to Rhodes University, and we kept in contact for 1 year. And then the rest followed. So the second moment is that then the student movement happened, still in 2016. And because of the power of being born in my country and in the township, how oblivious we were of the rural struggles, understanding some of the struggles that are I was challenged. And a comrade of mine was working in the corporate master for the team at Island. Said, come and join with the people in the theory of radical and have this student idea, go and work with the people in there. And not just as a thinker, you'll be doing things and working in the challenge. And then he was Professor Ntsebeza, as well as Professor Fred Jenkins, who was our team humanities at Rhodes then. And with us and sharing, knowledge in that kind of a setting. So school that is happening, that's alive and thinking and doing, that is happening outside of the confines of the university. And then the last moment we just want to talk about is they're now joining this that's the PhD student, they're joining the faculty as a staff member. There were a lot of things that I was unclear about as a young student, myself, communicating one in. And because you know, Professor in presidency, I don't know how we attach this, but here's actual a scholarship on the history of the university, especially African studies at the University of Cape Town, and some of the dynamics of, why we have the African languages separate from African studies and all of that, especially through the history of AC Jordan. I was so generous to say, come, let's have a meeting, let's have a conversation, and when you just walk us through some of the problems, some of the issues, and enlighten us that we are trying to navigate this space that can be very difficult for young people who are trying to actually make sense of it. So on those three broad categories, I think Professor Ntsebeza, it kind of touches on the broad areas that we have mentioned. Him as a mentor, him as an engaged scholar, and with interest on areas that really social justice and equality in this most of the. So thank you so much. Just going to
most was always his theoretical insight. And I see that on the strongest side. I know they gave scholarship as well. So, like we have time in our older age to think about theoretical insight. So I'd be interested seriously to hear from you one or two theoretical insights you'd like to leave us with. Maybe that you've changed about before we end.
While the sociologists are talking, I think there's something to be said. Oh, sorry. Another sociologist, which is separately. So there's something about, for those of us who are in the social sciences and humanities on this campus, there's something about the architecture and entering from the back, having Harry Garuba sit at the benches there, and then running into Lungisile ever so often. Frank has spoken about this. I don't think I can emphasize this enough. I think the sense of protection and yeah, the holding that both Harry and Lungisile have done for, I've only been there 10 years, because they've all been eventful 10 years. But the holding that both Lungisile and Harry did for many of us for a long period of time, just running into him. I wasn't there in sociology when he was there, but there are many stories that I've heard. And there's almost sort of a kind of an oral history that Lungi kept passing on to us. We miss him in sociology. I'm speaking to my colleagues here. We would have loved to have him back in that space with us, fighting the battles that we had for the many years. But there's a kind of a storytelling that has been happening, and Lungi's been telling stories, and Lungi been telling stories about the Center for African Studies. And there's a book that we did, and there's an interview on the Center for African Studies where there are innuendos, there are questions, there are lots of remarks, and there's this complex history of early anthropologists, people like Radcliffe Brown being in this place, and the archives of like studying the native and that kind of stuff that UCT and Center for African Studies comes out of. And then there is an oral history sort of there with Professor Lungisile and others who've been carrying it. I'm sure at some point some of those oral histories will also come out. But I just want to sort of acknowledge this kind of space. And I know that space might be called Garuba Square at some point. But one has to sort of think of African studies as this entry point for many people. Say, okay, things are okay. You can go and fight your battles in the front. You come from the back, go and fight your battles in the front. And this is the story that you carry with you. And sometimes when you're leaving, you stop again and you tell your story again about what that battle has been, and then you move on to come back. So yeah, Prof. Ntsebeza has been that person who tells us the stories of this place and holds us.
That's an excellent segue into architecture, because I feel like you're giving a physical architecture of personhood. And I think what you're asking for is partly linked to that, even though it's in sector, which is what you suggested, the theoretical insights. I don't think that they separate. I think that certainly for me, I can speak about the land stuff. You speak better about it yourself, but there are two levels in terms of the architecture that I think is really significant. The one is that you're able to make the theoretical insight that you do in part and before you are embedded, you are situated, and you bring that situated knowledge in such a profound way into the space. But also it really leads to the embodiment that you bring in this architecture around you. So I think that type of theoretical scholarship comes, certainly for me, we can talk about the method, what people speak about in terms of situated knowledge, etc. Externally, but but your theoretical insights into the land architecture becomes there. In part because when we read the literature around land, etc., and we're thinking about the politics of citation, just if you talk about that architecture, when you're trying to navigate who can you cite, where can you cite, who's saying something different, you can say partly many of those things theoretically. Also, I think importantly because it is grounded. So in this body of when we do academic research, etc., we talk about the literature review and what are the agenda gaps and what are the research gaps. There's also something really important to be able to talk about, that intuitive feeling that you can speak about. And I think that when that intuition is grounded also from political activism in an engaged and scholarly way, there's something really rich that comes to the fore, which I feel your scholarship, your intellectual academic scholarship set out that landscape. In that work, when for long, many of us who work on land in different forms, who we have to cite is very particular, right? Because what people will say first and foremost is, oh, in the literature, who's the citation, right? Where is the seminal work? So to be able to place you as one of those citation places is really important in that theoretical work, which I feel like can't come separately or didn't come separately from this very embedded work, which happens in these different moments of break or transition and moments in what the journal suggests, these different political moments, which is also very much these life moments that then converge all the time, that happen to be in this architecture here. I was going to make a different point, but because she went that way to the architecture, and you made this point, as if they're separate. But I think the reason why I'm saying that they're not separate is that your point, Frank, about the metaphor of doing this cushioning is actually not is a product of something and a method of something, which is really important to be able to nurture in the academic space, not just as, oh, it's kind and you're doing sexual reproduction, which is important, but actually it's a theoretical way of being in the world, which doesn't get affirmations in a space like this, and part of what you're able to do in making that pathway, linked to the reading roots, linked to, and I can talk about the and we don't see all that, but linked to those reading roots, etc., is, I think, fundamental. So just, I think that's very much located in the landscape of the theoretical world in land.
Thanks, Donna.
And I'm from the School of Ed, so I finished UCT 2018-19, so the syllabus already on my out, so I haven't felt that move. And I can see, and I know itself of the stories and why, but where I did come across your strong intervention, when I was trying to understand the long racist history of this institution. Many people know in the 90s the Mamdani affair, but they don't know the Mafeji disaster of the 90s. We all think of the 1968 moment. So where I came across your strength, but also your willingness to stand against institutional authority was the piece, one or two pieces that you wrote reflecting when with the previous Vice Max Price gave you the responsibility of soothing the relations with the that you were given the right to go into the archive that was still under the 30-year embargo. And you refused to not speak about, even though the Vice Chancellor said, we shouldn't speak about this thing, you did it, you didn't speak about it, you wrote about it in a way that left a thread for those who come after to pick up on. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that in your writing, the theoretical stuff, the engaged, caring stuff, but then also the willingness to really stick your neck out and say to authority, no, I'm going to do something else here, and that stays in the archive and stays as threads for us to pull on and hopefully to build actions. Thank you.
There's a name, it says Deneo S. surname. Maybe I'll read it. I would like to share an anecdote. I met Professor Ntsebeza in Basel, Switzerland in 2010. I was starstruck. In 2012, I submitted my master's working on traditional leadership disputes in the Limpopo province. Part of my not so well written thesis criticized Professor Ntsebeza's democracy compromise, arguing that Kalanga as a case could not be generalized. One of my supervisors, the late Professor Bonner, mentioned that he had selected Professor Ntsebeza to evaluate me. I thought, there goes academic aspiration. I got worried that my dissertation would fail, given that it was being marked by a professor whose ideas were highly regarded, yet parts of my work argued against his. To my astonishment, he turned out to be the most understanding and constructive of all the examiners. Years later, as I have developed intellectually, I think Professor Ntsebeza's critique of traditional leaders was not just a critique of traditionalism, but rather a deep understanding of how Ukosi was tarnished by the colonial and apartheid system.
Yeah.
He is humble, soft-spoken, calm, and one of the most brilliant professors of our times. He has influenced our intellectual journey and our democracy in ways that we would not know. Thank you to all of you for commemorating his work while he is with us. Tunayoko Sami, Ntsebeza. Sure.
I don't have anything new to say, and I think that's almost the most wonderful thing that President Ntsebeza leaves us with, that there is a sense of solidarity in the way that you make things possible. And that's a very rare thing for scholars, to make things possible, to make it feel like scholarship is possible in a political way, to be a person is possible in scholarship. And I think my first real meeting with you, of course, I've been introduced to your work and so on prior to that, but my first real meeting with you, that was what I was left with at the end of it, the sense of possibility. You invited me to speak at the conference in Samir Amin. And I remember doing this very large kind of thing about his modes of production and the critique of the future mode of production, etc. And at the end of it, I had just, it was a few weeks after I had given birth to my daughter. And I had come for the keynote because it was such a special affair for me to talk about Samir Amin in such a central way. And I remember after less than 48 hours of being on this campus, I said, I just need to go back home to her. And I didn't know how to tell you. Eventually I said, look, I know I committed to 3 days, but I need to. He said, well, you can't be thinking if you're miserable. We'll organize for you to go back. And that sense of the possibility to work, to think, but also to be humane while doing these things are some of the most, I think it's what I'm hearing everybody saying. It's what I felt as well. And that is such an important thing, especially in the climate we're in today, to have thoughts not only endure through history and scholarship and to endure through history, but also the spaces of possibility to actually think in a humane, in a kind of, in a space of integrity and possibility. And all I can say is thank you for leaving us with that. I think 5 years later, actually committing to being at UCT in terms of working here, a large part of it has to do with the initial introduction I had from you 5 years ago. I don't know if I would have actually been able to make the decision, despite the Pan-Africanism that we grew up with, to come here. But because of you, I think that space of possibility has always stayed with me 5 years ago. Thank you.
I just wanted to say the online audience, which we have been neglecting, the sound also has been difficult, so we haven't opened the mics for that. I think Mika has asked if you have any comments, you can write them like the one that we have written, but I think we also sort of drawing the discussion part to a close. But Another, did you have? No, you didn't.
Perhaps as it comes, can
Yeah.
yeah. So I think for me, the importance of this is to try and learn from Lungisile's work, but also his activism, the engaged part, but also the scholarship. And one of the questions perhaps that Lungisile should, like, David was saying, should reflect when it comes in is how do we, how do you pass on the mantle, particularly working with Lungisile, you realize that he is very bored, like Fred mentioned. And this for me came, at several points, particularly when speaking both to political leaders, even within the ANC and others, he would tell them the truth about land reform. Yeah, because there's a lot of this politicking around land. And Lungisile would go there and tell them just what he thinks is the truth, which is a very important statement. And and because of that, they didn't like him, or they didn't invite him to these big conferences. But that's an example of somebody who's bored and sticking to the truth. And I think, and similarly, been here at UCT when he was doing work on Mafeje, he had to be bored enough to go and write things that the university didn't want to hear. And so that boredness, looking where, how it's perhaps something that we need as we go on in the university, in this country, but there's in this continent.
I think this is from for keys. Focus. Okay, we go. It reads, I extend my woman's congratulations to Professor Ntsebeza. I'm curious to know how he sustains the bookshop. Knowledge Resource Center in Kala. Does the local community use it? Does he hold reading knowledge sharing sessions? Who are the people who make the most use of the marvelous resources?
Thanks. Is there anything final?
Yeah. Police everyone here to my name, and I don't have much to add. But when I met the Prof at the University of Ibadan, and you can see how it is to this big African soil station. I have read a lot about it. And when I met him, I don't know it is him. And then I just keep on chatting. And the humility and what happens in that African study association, I don't know how it is now, but because it is African study of Africa, as against what you would say African study made in the USA. So that where that goes now, I don't know, maybe you can. But I met him as a investor, but I'm from Nigeria. I'm meeting him there, and so just giving the continental perspective. Thank you very much.
Thanks. There's a lot there for you to reflect on that here. Maybe I think there's no final point of question or observation. I think I'll ask. Take the podium. Tell us about the bookshop.
Yeah, well, there's so many questions that have been asked here, and it's something that I prepared. So I'm just trying to work out how I'm going to answer a few things. But I'm persuaded now that I shouldn't stick to the text. I should respond from this off the cuff, and hoping that I'll still be coherent. But I mean, I must first of all start by thanking Itonge and Shahid Vauda who was the chair of he was the holder of the Archimafred chair, DCT. There's still a story to be told by Mafred. It's never ending.
Yeah.
And UCT even now, hasn't fulfilled its own creations on the planet. There was that chair, I don't know why it is called to now.
It's frozen.
And I'm still going to write about it. It's a deal work. That's what I've done. And so Shahid was one of the people, friends, the two of you, who came to me that late this. But it was not a proposal, something that we have decided that we're going to do, and I didn't like it. I didn't like it, and when you proposed this, the first thing I did was to go to Google and so on, and say, where has it happened that a person who's still alive is commemorated? And what does that person do? Respond. And it was difficult to find something. There were people retire, farewell, ceremonies and so on, but not something of the nature that Chitonga had Shahid proposed. And it happened, and we're here now, and must really thank you, Chitonga, and of course, Shahid. And I must also thank people who presented papers at the conference, but also those who endured the pain of going through peer review, the peer review process. I know that it's not good. It's not good. You write something and you think, it's done. And then it comes. These days, there's this thing called track change or something. Yeah. And you say, look, I thought this thing was done. You never relax until the article is published. Because even the copy editors come with their own stuff. But there is this word. Don't write a big paragraph and so on. Just change this and so on. Even hallmark and so on, which is good. Ultimately, when you see the product, you really feel good. And so people who have written and the papers that appear in special issue, I take my hat off you and thank you. And I cannot forget to thank Peter Lawrence. It's a pity, the sound is not good. Yeah. It would have been nice, to have interactions with him and his team. He's not working alone. He works with a team. I, first of all, dealt with Peter. But later on, there are other names that came, Adam, Clay, and so on. So it's a whole team, all efficient and taking no nonsense. Now, coming to the rejoinder. The questions that have been asked, that I would love to respond to. But there is something that's been said about me, papers, and today about my scholarship, that I'm an engaged scholar and an inserted scholar. There's a term that I didn't know, but it's a term that Tembela Kefe, who's also contributed here, the term that he used, and I like it. Insurgent, it's close to me. Yeah. The person who's been reading Robert Taylor the war of the flea on guerrilla warfare and so on. I just love the sort of that. So you've said, your bit about, being an engaged scholar and so on. But, when I was writing my rejoinder, and even now I'm tempted to do that, I thought that, because I'm still alive, and I should not tell you, I should reflect about my own journey. And in doing that, it was a good exercise. And it's an exercise that helped me respond to Fred, who wants me to write a book. And an autobiography, I'm not sure. I mean, you gave me a text that I didn't write. But from what you're saying, you want people like me and to talk about who we are, our scholarship and so on. So when I was thinking about this exercise, I mean, he gave me ideas as to how that thing. And because my approach was an historical approach, trying to trace what it is that made me who I am now. And Andrew Nash, and to a certain extent, Fred, I mean, deal now about that history. And Andrew, he starts his narration with our encounter with Andrew John, who gave no expert evidence in our tribe in 1976, 1977, when we were facing offenses under the Suppression of Communism Act. And there were a number of books that were found in our possession, mainly Marxist orientated. And the state had sort of invited Stoffel van der Merwe, who at the time was a senior lecturer at the Rand Afrikaans University around, which is now UJ, and to give evidence. And of course, Stoffel, for the state, gave no evidence that was not going to happen. But I mean, we tore his evidence to pieces from the door. And but then our lawyer, our advocate, Justice Prof, told us that, well, you might have done your bit, discredited sort of this witness, but he remains an expert witness. You need your own expert to counter sort of even if that expert is going to repeat what you said. And then our first thought was Rick Tanner. Rick Tanner, I'm sure the people know. I mean, know who Rick Tanner was, but he was political philosopher and left-leaning, and had given evidence in a case that involved Black consciousness leaders in 1975, which arose out of what was called a Prof rally that took place in Durban. So Rick and Steve, they gave no evidence when these leaders were tried. So when Justice talked about this, the need to have an expert, we said, okay, let's go to Rick Tanner. And Rick at the time was banned, and Van Sky had become independent. He was in Durban, so he was in another country, we were in another country. And it just became difficult for us to secure the services of Rick Turner. And I don't know whether I've said it, he was also banned there. And there were two ministers we had to deal with. There was Jimmy Kruger, who was the Minister of Justice, Prisons, and whatever in South Africa. And there was George Matanzima, who was the Minister of Justice in Transkei. So Rick Turner was out. And then we went to Rick to say, no, Rick, no, what do we do? Who can do this job? And he said, 100 to 12. 100 to 12. I said, Afrikaner? And where is it from? From Stellenbosch University. And he said, no, we said, no, just forget about this. No, I mean, we can't get an Afrikaner from an Afrikaans-speaking university like Stellenbosch producing no apartheid leaders and so on. And so we went to journalists. Remember Barry Strick? People know who belong to my age. He was a reporter for the Daily Dispatch at the time. Went to Barry Strick and so said, no, look, I mean, who can help us? We didn't tell them that look, there's this African that's been recognized. So they came with names, Shania, this and that. And then we took those names to Rick. And each time we went to Rick and said, no, I know all these people. They're going to crack under cross-examination. Your person is under control, right? And of course, we ended up taking the services of under control. And I remember how it happened. It's there in the paper. That when Rick was insisting that your person is under control, we said no to Justice Boswell, our advocate. That look, go to Stellenbosch and scrutinize this person. So Justice left. It was a Friday, and then he came back on a Sunday. We were in prison. So he came for consultation in prison. And as we were entering sort of the room where he was doing the consultation, we met a beaming justice. They still have that image of justice. And all he told us was, Tutoy is our man. And of course, I mean, everyone covers this, but I don't want to, we don't have time. I mean, of course, no, but Andre Tutoy gave evidence in a way that left us with our mouths open. And I remember my father, who was there in the audience, worried, of course, as a parent. And after the testimony, he came to us and said that, look, Andre Tutoy is getting out of prison. And just one example to show how brilliant it was. We were charged under the Suppression of Communism Act, and there was no literature that was communist. The Communist Manifesto was part of it, Engels, science, socialism, science, and utopian scientific socialism, and all those sort of works. They were exhibits, right? So it was clear, and it was clear even with return that we couldn't escape the fact that we were communists, we were Marxists. Then comes Andre Tutoy, he had other ideas. And Andre says that oh yes, I see the point. You are Marxist, but not as defined in the Act. And then he went through the Act and said that look, the communism that they are talking about here is a version of communism that one could call Stalinism. You are not Stalinist. If you're Stalinist, you would be critical of the leadership and so on. And because you are not Stalinist, you don't fall in that definition of Marx. And that's the point, And he was rigorous. And he made his point very clear. In fact, the judge from Munich, murderous judge, angry judge, Munich, the way he summed up unraised evidence when he sentenced us was that no, as for Dr. Tutoy, he was doctor then. As for Dr. Tutoy, he was splitting hands. I mean, he was speaking in a typical academic profession, full stop. And that's how they started. Because so, why I use my trend, Andrew National gives that story. And in his article, if you read it carefully, he says this was the moment, the turning point, that Corona sort of that. Fred takes it alien. Fred talks about the study groups that led to our arrest. And so at least that gap, Andrew's gap, he feels. But personally, I go back to Tala. To Tala, that small village where I was born. And I look at the influence of the family, both parents, teachers, and my father loved books, reading books, newspapers, magazines, and listening to radio. Listen to programs and he would laugh on his own. There was a strict division, at that moment. I'm sure most people share that. As children, we wouldn't sit in the lounge. The lounge was for elderly people and visitors. We sat in the kitchen. And my mother sat with us. My father would be there in the lounge on his own, reading his newspapers, listening to his radios, laughing to himself. He would read them all. And then I was sitting giggling and laughing at himself. And he had no private classes, for people who wanted to do matric and so on. The interesting thing with my father, he never encouraged us to read. He said nothing, but the resources were there. And if he saw you reading, books or taking books from his bookshelf, he would keep quiet. He would never scold you and so on. But he was never actively, maybe with my brother, because my brother was the oldest, when my brother tells the stories, seems as if there's a lot of coordination that was going between the two of them, maybe because he was the eldest. But in my case, there was no connection. It was always distant, not familiar. So, but he, through seeing books in a place, I think that in one interview, I said, there was always something to read at home, whether it was a newspaper and magazine and so on. So that's the environment. And that environment was reinforced by what is happening outside the family, not even in schools and so outside the family, where we had this culture. There was this culture of reading, not study groups or reading groups or something, but there was the culture of reading books, and what is indelible in your mind was this abundance. Yeah. Of sharing, which made it possible for us to share books, as people who had access to books, to share these books with those who were from less disadvantaged, or from disadvantaged families who couldn't afford to buy these books. And so that was one thing I think is important. And then the next step, of course, was within the family. I had a brother who was very talkative, very, what you say? Illustrative. Yes, my brother, and a storyteller. A storyteller. And the turning point for me in politics was when he went to Forte. Forte, 1967, he got involved in student politics. They were reading Fanon, they were reading Cabral, and so on. And it was 67, 68, they got arrested and he was expelled for it. And but when he came back, oh, he used to tell so many stories about Forte, about life at Forte, but also sort of talked about politics. And that's, if I remember well, that was the first time, or my first encounter with politics. But now remember then the broader context of this was the 60s, soon after Sharpeville, and people were scared, talking about politics and so on. So my brother was a big influence, and but the turning point was, of course, my encounter with what I say in the paper is encounter with Marxism, and all the things that have been said here about how we were conducting our study groups. This close analysis, scrutiny of text. And was talking about, Andrew, was it about Andrew? A paragraph on Hegel. In our case, I remember first time I read the Communist Manifesto in this study group, a spectre is haunting Europe, the spectre of communism. 4-5 hours. Jesus. Right. This guy who knows, answers, what is spectre? And just, you want to go on. We were trained in a way when you would read and finish a book. But for him, it was no understanding. So spectre, and then haunt, and Europe, and what was the context? I was doing accounting, no history at all, and now told about them. And at the end of it, I discovered, with time, that just reading a sentence, you could end up doing all sorts of things, learning about history, mathematics, science, and so forth. So, it's in the article, and Andrew, no, not Andrew. It's in the article, and I don't want to talk about that. We don't have time. And but one thing I want to say about our study group and my own upbringing, something that I think stayed with me, was first of all this thing. These days I call it dogmatism. We didn't use that language, but the way we sort of we treat. We sort of we conducted our group was that we spent more time reading texts written from a perspective that we didn't like. Capitalism and so on. So that which you did not like was what we focused on. And not what I see now or what I found here and other institutions where people said, if I don't like this, I'm not going to read it. You see. But our training was that look, you must engage. That was before I did formal philosophy. You must engage with the text and tell us what it is that you don't like and provide an alternative. Right. We took Marx's 11 thesis on Feuerbach, that philosophers have only understood the world, and that the thing is, you don't just understand the world, you must change the world. We took that very seriously. So reading immersion of that context, that you must understand the world. And if you don't understand the world, then it's going to be difficult for you to change it or to know how to change it. You can change it by destroying things. That's change, right? But if you want sort of a society which is better than the one we're contesting, then you must understand and then find ways of changing that. I would like, on this notion of dogmatism and so on, I like to know sort of a quote, from some year that I cite, in the paper, which will give you an idea of the kind of Marxist I am. I think it speaks to who we were and who I am now. Now, Samir Amino says, to be a Marxist is to continue the work that Marx merely began, even though that beginning was of unequal power. It is not to stop at Marx, but to start from him. Marx is boundless because the radical critique that he initiates is itself boundless, always incomplete, and must always be the object of its own critique. Marxism, as formulated at a particular moment, has to undergo a Marxist critique. This thing of being told that this is the correct line. You shouldn't deviate, you shouldn't question. And people work with me, and what I've heard here, people have captured the essence of who I am. I don't like people just follow the fashion. And I want people who think, people who can critique, and people who can be self-critical. And the other thing, yes, I'm just, probably, but we don't have time. I would like to go to, in a way, respond to the question that Dave raised. Theoretical insights. So he said, what theoretical insights I'm leaving you with? And I'm not leaving anything, I'm still alive. This insight, the insights, that must be measured of the group, so that we all get into this journey. My journey is not finished. But over the years, when I became an academic, I've been thinking a lot about, methodological issues, the methodology that we should adopt. And Achima Feje, I think, gave me insights when he talks about a theory that is imposed in a particular context, and a theory that evolves out of that context. He uses these technical terms. I think he uses it in your article, Fred. But that's the essence of and for me, I think this is what we should focus on, especially when we think about decolonization, decolonialism, or whatever term we want to use. The critique some of us have of colonization is that we are an image of something superior, right? So that's the theory. That you have a theory, you go out there, and then you look for something that is going to confirm your theory. This is, you talk a lot about it these days. But when I started here, so I thought it was something that was very important. And but I think that kind of thinking is still with us. We say it, but you don't practice. Don't practice is not saying that, let us not do this, go out with a theory and look for something that will be like your theory. My approach is an approach that is rooted in field. And where you deal with issues, of course, come with your theory, but the theory itself should be in conversation with what is happening there, so that whenever there is a disjunction between the theory and what you see there, the victim is not the practice that is out there. The victim can be the theory itself. The theory that needs to be changed. I think this is something that I would suggest for this audience. And couple that with a question that worries me. It worries me about the left today. It's invisible. Things are happening. We have the power to analyze things, but we are nowhere to be seen. And I think the question we should ask ourselves is, why is that? And I'm not excluding myself from that. I'm part of it. And if you ask me about where my thinking is today, it's exactly that. What is the failure? Where are we failing? What is it that we must understand about the power of capitalism that makes it difficult for us to challenge capitalism? So my reading of Capital, Marx and so on is against that background. That what is the nature of capitalism today, and and what is the force, or what are the forces that can talk about that system? I think I should stop.
Yes, as I was thinking. But it's I'm also troubled by the repeated use of the term legacy. What is it? Because he's still very much work in progress and has work to do. And it's an office here, so he has to come to work occasionally and do work. But I'm like all of you, I think, struck by just also which I think Natasha mentioned, it's the ethics in the sense of practice that is so powerful. And so we can debate ideas, and we can learn from the directions you kind of point us to in terms of scholarship, but also parts of the country that are invisibilized by these locations we find ourselves in the big urban centers, but also the way to kind of make those connections across the continent. But there's just something very powerful about the ethical kind of embodiment of your practice that is for multiple generations of people very powerful, and that we take a strong lesson from, and very difficult in the context, I think, as you're describing, writing, or what you're thinking about, to be the kind of scholar that you're describing, or that you are, that others aspire to, in a context of defeat, as you described, the kind of overwhelming, pressures globally, but also that globally how that manifests through the institutional life and what it means to be a young scholar today, and to be a critical scholar in this context. It's very difficult for many people. So it's very important to have your example, to have your courage, I think, to speak truth to the kind of institutional dogmas and everyday practices, and the pressure to think about what it means to be a scholar in this context, beyond the careerism and the professionalization of the associational life, but that in fact we have a very unique and in some ways still in South Africa quite distinct from the continent, a public university system that we still can defend, we ask critical questions from, and resourced in ways that other parts of the continent is not. And we have to appreciate both the strategic importance of that and what we can do with that, both for our students, but also as a space to ask questions about the society, of our leaders, and of ourselves. So thank you for all for embodying that, and thank all of you for coming, and for the putting it together, Chitonga and Peter Lawrence and your colleagues in the journal, the colleagues, the Review of African Political Economy, and my colleagues at the Center. Going helped us, and of course, Noma African City. Who did a lot of the organizing work. So thank you. Minja, is there something you want to keep?
Yes, 2 weeks ago, one for errors in errors.
Oh, they are here.
Yeah.
Take my
head. So from Peter Lawrence, Lungisile asked me to do the keynote address to a meeting of Centers of African Studies in Africa when I was in London visiting fellow at CAS. This wasn't my expertise really, but I ended up looking at the history of African studies and its role as a product and facilitator of colonization. So I've learned a lot. 12 years later, I have an article in the next issue of Rogue 181, which revisits the issue in the context of knowledge production and of Rogue's history, querying the idea of African studies. I also had another education being taken by Lungisile and Chitonga to the Eastern Cape and witnessing the way in which an engaged scholar such as Lungisile interacted with local people and their organizations, and his empathy with them and their projects for improving their lives. Then a final short note from Mpumi, which is, I still have a vivid picture of Dumisa as a young student at Fort Hare in 1967, standing on top of a desk to address an impromptu mass meeting. That's how tiny Eve was, and that was the beginning of what actually led us to being expelled in 68. A true narrator, indeed. So, thank you. Thanks everybody for coming, and please join us for some refreshments in the foyer and chat more. Okay. Thank you.